This instructional video is to be used only as a training aid. It is not intended as a replacement for the operating instructions or Hydra-Stop factory training. Installation operation should be performed by properly trained personnel. Before beginning any Hydra-Stop installation, be sure to read, understand, and follow the operating instructions in the manual. Never attempt to install Insta-Valve 250 insertion valves at pressures greater than 150 psi if equipment is not rated for 250 psi installation. This includes the temporary gate valve and the Hydra Tapper machine. Contact Hydra-Stop at 708-389-5111 if you have any questions regarding equipment PSI ratings. Remember, always use appropriate safety equipment. Inspect and begin unpackaging the Insta-Valve 250 Patriot valve. Inspect the valve body to ensure no damage has occurred during shipment or storage. Confirm the valve is the proper size for your project. Valve size is stamped on the valve bottom sleeve. Locate the valve cartridge and bag containing the stainless steel mounting hardware. Store in a clean, safe location. Thoroughly clean the pipe surface with a brush where the valve body will be installed to ensure all loose debris and material is removed. Inspect for flaws, gouges, bumps, excessive corrosion, and irregular surfaces. These surfaces should be avoided to assure maximum gasket sealing. Lubricate the top and bottom of the pipe and mat and throat gaskets with a soap water solution. Ensure the branch gasket is adequately lubricated. Mount the top half of the valve body on the pipe in the position required for permanent installation. Do not rotate the top half of the valve body after it is positioned on the pipe. Use a level to make sure the valve is level on the pipe. Install the bottom half of the valve body over the tapered ends of the mat gasket, ensuring they are flat and smooth against the pipe surface. Visually inspect the gasket to ensure tapered ends are not folded or rolled under themselves. Install the stainless steel carriage bolts, washers, and nuts. Finger tighten nuts, ensuring gaps between the top half and bottom half of the valve body are the same front to back and side to side within 1/8 of an inch. Use a torque wrench with a 1 1/16 inch socket to tighten the nuts in the proper pattern. Never use an impact wrench to tighten the valve body mounting nuts. Use of an impact wrench can gall the mounting bolts and does not allow for the control of tightening torque. Always use a torque wrench. Tightening patterns are shown here and also in the valve body installation instructions. Repeat tightening pattern in no more than 25 foot-pound increments until recommended torque is reached. Recommended torque is shown in this chart and also shown in the valve body installation instructions. Wait 10 minutes to allow the gasket to fully seat, then retighten bolts to recommended torque. Completion pins are shipped in the fully installed position. Back out and ensure completion pins are flush with the ID of the flange. Fill the valve body with water. Spray pressure test plug O-ring with spray-on food-grade lubricant. Press fit the pressure test plug into the top of the valve body. Install 4 flange bolts into the 4 mounting holes of the pressure test plug assembly. Finger tighten a washer and nut on each of the 4 bolts. Connect the 1/2 inch quick connect coupler on the pressure test tree to the 1/2 inch quick connect nipple on the pressure test plug. Connect pressure test tree to your pressure source for pressure testing. Hydra-Stop recommends using a hydrostatic method of pressurizing the valve body. Do not use a compressible medium such as air. Follow local rules for the recommended length of the pressure test. After completing pressure tests, use ball valve to blow off pressure before removing pressure test plug. After the pressure test, retorque the carriage bolts to recommended torque. Install the temporary gate valve. 4, 6, and 8-inch Insta-Valve 250s use the 8-inch temporary gate valve. If possible, avoid positioning the valve at the true 3, 6, 9, or 12 o'clock position to allow easy access to the completion pins. Temporary gate valves are single direction valves and must be positioned top up. The 8-inch temporary gate valve must be installed with the O-ring groove facing up. Install the O-ring in the O-ring groove of the 8-inch temporary gate valve. Fully open the temporary gate valve. Select the proper size saw mandrel. Core sampling and tapping of the 4 through 8-inch Insta-Valve 250 requires the 41-inch long saw mandrel. Thread the 2.5-inch core cutter to the 41-inch saw mandrel completely, then unscrew until the through holes in the cutter align with threaded saw mandrel holes. Insert and thread both 1/4 by 20 by 3/4 inch set screws from the inside of the cutter. The set screws prevent the cutter from over-tightening on the saw mandrel. Loosen and remove the Allen head pilot drill retaining set screw located on the side of the saw mandrel flange base. Visually locate the tapered relief on the base of the pilot drill. Notice the stop or ledge at the base of the taper. Mark the flat of the taper with a visible marking agent. Align the pilot drill flat with the Allen head set screw hole and insert the pilot drill. Insert and tighten the set screw. Test pull the pilot drill to ensure the set screw is properly locked in place against the pilot drill ledge. Check the coupon retaining clips so they move freely. Attach the 6 or 8-inch centering ring to the top of the saw mandrel flange using the 5/16 by 18 by 1 2/4 inch bolts through to the top of the centering ring. Ensure the wider portion of the centering ring is positioned away from the cutter assembly. Make sure the saw mandrel is clean and free of rust or grime. Steel wool can be used to clean and smooth the surface. Lay the Hydra tapper on its side. Lubricate the end of the saw mandrel with a spray of the food-grade lubricant. Insert coring assembly completely into the Hydra tapper machine. Hand tighten the clamp lever on the packing nut assembly to keep the assembled shell cutter and saw mandrel in place. Install the assembled Hydra tapper onto the 8-inch temporary gate valve and align the bolt slots. Use caution to not damage the shell cutter or pilot drill as the unit is raised and positioned onto the temporary valve. Ensure the O-ring stays in place and the tapping machine is aligned with the register on the temporary gate valve. Install and cross-tighten the bolts, nuts, and washers to secure the assembly. Using a 15/16 and a 1 1/16 open-ended wrench, cross-tighten the nuts to secure the tapping machine to the temporary gate valve. Control the saw mandrel, loosen the packing nut clamp lever, and slowly lower the saw mandrel down until the pilot drill is resting on top of the pipe. While not required for a core sample tap, a stop collar can be set at approximately 3 inches. Ensure the cutter spins freely in a clockwise direction. Install the drive unit by lifting it above the saw mandrel into the 3 guide bars and lowering the drive unit onto the machine hex of the saw mandrel. Install the feed screw by threading it through the top plate of the Hydra-Tapper. When the feed screw contacts the drive motor, align the through holes in the drive motor restraint and the feed screw. Insert the lower restraint cotter pin and install the cotter clip. Insert the upper restraint pin and install the cotter clip. Ensure the ball valve on the Hydra-Tapper P2 housing is open. Connect the drive unit power source to the drive unit. Ensure the drive unit lever control is in the neutral position. Engage the drive unit and confirm the saw mandrel is rotating in the clockwise direction. Tap depth will be approximately 2 inches. Slowly turn the handle assembly in a clockwise direction, keeping slight constant pressure until the tap is complete. Close the ball valves on the gate valve and the Hydra-Tapper as water fills the housings and flows from the valves. When the centering ring makes contact with the stop inside the IV250, the tap is complete. Return the drive unit lever to neutral. Tighten the packing nut assembly clamp lever. Disconnect the drive unit power source. Remove the upper and lower drive unit restraint assembly cotter pins and clips. Remove the feed screw. Remove the drive unit. Completely remove the feed screw. Use an open-ended wrench as a lever brake and allow the sampling assembly to rise completely. Never place your hand in a position where it can be injured. Proper lever braking technique is shown in the right-hand panel. Lock the saw mandrel in place by tightening the packing nut assembly clamp lever. Close the temporary gate valve. Relieve the pressure from the Hydra-Tapper by opening the ball valve and discharging the pressure. Unbolt and remove the Hydra-Tapper from the temporary gate valve. Place the Hydra-Tapper in a dry and safe work area. Remove the cutter and saw mandrel assembly. Unbolt and remove the centering ring. Remove the coupon by loosening the Allen head pilot drill retaining set screw. Remove the pilot drill from the saw mandrel. Remove and flip the pilot drill and insert it point end through the hole in the coupon past the retaining clips and use it to pull the coupon out of the cutter. Measure the coupon thickness and calculate the inner diameter. After completion of the core sample procedure, you will be able to determine the exact inner diameter of the pipe on which the Insta-Valve 250 is to be installed. The formula to calculate pipe ID is as follows. ID equals OD minus 2 times the pipe wall thickness. Example, OD of pipe is 6.9 inches. Pipe wall thickness is equal to 1/2 of an inch. The ID is equal to 6.9 inches minus 2 times 0.5 inches. The ID is equal to 6.9 inches minus 1 inch, or the ID is 5.9 inches. Use the ID calculated with the formula to select both the shell cutter size required and also the IV250 cartridge size required from the shell cutter selection chart appendix in the Insta-Valve 250 installation instructions. The shell cutter selection chart is shown on the screen. Disassemble core sampling equipment. The coupon must be removed before cutter set screws and cutter can be removed. Depending on nominal valve size, attach the appropriate 6-inch or 8-inch cutter, standard or undersized, to the saw mandrel and secure with standard cuttered hardware as normal. Insert the 2.5-inch centering tool into the pilot bit hole, align through hole with saw mandrel through hole, and lock in place with cotter pin and clip. Make sure the saw mandrel is clean and free of rust or grime. Steel wool can be used to clean and smooth the surface if necessary. Lubricate the end of the saw mandrel with a spray of the food-grade lubricant provided with your equipment. Insert tapping assembly completely into the Hydra-Tapper. Hand tighten the clamp lever. Install the assembled Hydra-Tapper onto the 8-inch temporary gate valve and align the bolt slots. Ensure the O-ring remains in place. Install and finger tighten the square-headed bolts, nuts, and washers. Using a 15/16 and a 1 1/16 open-ended wrench, cross-tighten the nuts to secure the tapping machine to the temporary gate valve. Install the temporary gate valve bypass assembly. Open the bypass valve to allow pressure to equalize above and below the temporary gate valve. Close the ball valve on the temporary gate valve when fluid flows from the opening. Fully open the temporary gate valve. Hold and control the exposed saw mandrel. Loosen the packing nut assembly clamp lever and slowly lower the saw mandrel until the cutter is resting on top of the pipe. Tighten the packing nut assembly clamp lever. Slide a stop collar over the saw mandrel. Set the cutting depth by measuring from the top of the packing nut assembly to the lower side of the stop collar. Cutting depths are shown in this chart. Install the drive unit by lifting it above the saw mandrel and slide it into the 3 guide bars. Lower the drive unit onto the machine hex of the saw mandrel. Confirm the drive unit is fully seated onto the machine hex of the saw mandrel before continuing. Install the feed screw by threading it through the top plate of the Hydra-Tapper. Insert the lower restraint cotter pin and install the cotter clip. Insert the upper restraint pin and install the cotter clip. Ensure the ball valve on the Hydra-Tapper P2 housing is open. Open the packing nut assembly clamp lever. Connect the drive unit power source to the drive unit. Ensure the drive unit lever control is in the neutral position. Engage the drive unit and confirm the saw mandrel is rotating in the clockwise direction. Slowly turn the handle assembly in a clockwise direction, keeping slight constant pressure until the tap is complete. The tap is complete when the stop collar reaches the top of the packing nut. Return the drive unit lever control to the neutral position. Tighten the packing nut assembly clamp lever to lock the saw mandrel in place. Disconnect the drive unit power source. Remove the upper and lower drive unit restraint assembly cotter pins and clips. Back off the feed screw and then remove the drive unit. Continue to back out the feed screw until it is clear of the P3 assembly. Place a box end wrench over the hex on the saw mandrel and use the wrench as a lever brake. Loosen the clamp lever and allow the pressure to slowly raise the cutter assembly into the tap machine housing. Tighten the clamp lever when the assembly is fully retracted. Close the temporary gate valve. Relieve the pressure from the Hydra-Tapper by opening the ball valve and discharging the pressure. Unbolt and remove the Hydra-Tapper from the temporary gate valve. place the Hydra tapper in a dry and safe work area. Remove the cutter and saw mandrel assembly. Remove the cotter pin and clip and disengage the 2.5-inch centering tool. Flip the centering tool and insert it point end through the hole in the coupon. Pass the retaining clips and use it to pull the coupon out of the cutter. Disassemble the cutter assembly. Clean and store the components in a safe location. Installation of the 4 through 8 inch Insta-Valve 250 will require the 4 through 8 inch insertion housing, the 48.5 inch insertion tool, 2 guide plates, the auto equalization adapter, and the optional 4 through 8 inch alignment gauge kit. Stand the insertion housing on a flat surface with the O-ring grooved flange facing up. Place the O-ring into the insertion housing O-ring groove. Place the Hydra tapper on top of the insertion housing with the pointed end of the P3 facing the same direction as the step stand of the housing. Install and finger tighten the nuts. Using a 15/16 and 1 1/16 open-ended wrench, cross-tighten the nuts to secure the tapping machine to the insertion housing. Tip and lay the insertion housing tapping machine assembly on its side. The Insta-Valve 250 valve cartridge consists of a top section and bottom section. The top section and bottom section must be firmly tightened together. Prior to removing the operating nut, hold the base of the valve cartridge and with a pipe wrench or valve key, turn the valve stem firmly in the opening direction. Remove the operating nut and the white Teflon washer from the valve stem and place in a clean, safe location. If you plan on using the auto equalization feature, remove the NPT plug in the auto equalization check valve with a 5/16 inch Allen wrench. Otherwise, leave the NPT plug in place. Place the end of the insertion tool over the valve stem and turn clockwise until snug. Turn the insertion tool knurled handle clockwise until snug. Tighten the lock nut at the base of the handle with a 3/4 inch opened end wrench. Slide the Auto E adapter over the handle and then the larger portion of the insertion tool. Make sure the actuator pin is aligned with the check valve opening and press the actuator pin down as far as possible to completely open the check valve. Tighten the 2 cap screws with a 3/16 inch Allen wrench to secure the adapter in place. Lubricate the end of the insertion tool with a spray of the food-grade lubricant. Slide the insertion tool through the insertion housing and the tapping machine assembly until the top of the valve cartridge is approximately 2.5 inches away from the insertion housing. Make sure the shorter, truncated side of the valve cartridge, marked with a star, is facing upwards. Set up the Insta-Valve 250 4 through 8 inch alignment gauge for the size being installed. Refer to the alignment gauge instructions shipped with the 4 through 8 inch Insta-Valve 250 alignment gauge kit. Set the curved portion of the alignment gauge into the lock pin groove of the valve cartridge. Slide the cartridge and gauge towards the insertion housing until the gauge pins seat in the housing flange. Make a reference mark on the insertion housing aligned with the center line of the alignment gauge. Place the 7.5 inch depth gauge from the alignment kit onto the insertion tool. Make sure one end is firmly against the packing nut assembly. Slide a stop collar onto the insertion tool and butt it against the depth gauge. Tighten the stop collar set screw. This procedure sets the proper depth for cartridge insertion. Slide and place a guide plate to within 2 inches of the stop collar and lock the clamp lever. Slide the valve cartridge back to the original 2.5 inch measurement away from the insertion housing. Remove the Insta-Valve 250 alignment gauge. Lubricate the completion plug O-ring with sprays of the food-grade lubricant provided with the equipment. Slide the valve cartridge assembly fully into the insertion housing. Tighten the clamp lever on the packing nut assembly to keep the assembled valve cartridge and insertion tool in place. Make sure the O-ring in the temporary gate valve is still properly seated in the O-ring groove and safely install the insertion equipment onto the temporary valve. Align the insertion housing reference mark made earlier with the point of the pentagon valve body that is in line with the direction of the pipe. You may also utilize the star on the valve as an alignment reference. 8, 10, and 12-inch IB250 valves do not have a star reference mark embossed in the casting. 8, 10, and 12-inch valves have external ribs which run the height of the valve. These ribs are shown in red for clarity. This is the only rib on the valve body which aligns directly with the set pin port. Use this rib and the set pin port as your alignment guide for 8, 10, and 12-inch valves. Install and finger tighten the square-headed bolts, nuts, and washers. Using a 15/16 and a 1 1/16 open-ended wrench, cross-tighten the nuts to secure the insertion assembly to the temporary gate valve. Grasp and control the insertion tool. Loosen the packing nut clamp lever and slowly lower the insertion tool assembly until it touches the temporary gate valve. Retighten the clamp lever. Install the feed screw by threading it through the Hydra-Tapper P3 brass nut. When approximately 6 inches of the feed screw is visible below the P3, slide a second guide plate onto the feed screw. Tighten the guide plate clamp lever. Continue to advance the feed screw until it completely covers the knurled handle and is tight against the insertion tool locking nut. Open the ball valve on the insertion housing and the tapping machine. Open the ball valve on the temporary gate valve bypass. Close the insertion housing ball valve once fluid reaches the ball valve. Wait for fluid to reach the tapping housing ball valve and close the ball valve. Completely open the temporary gate valve. Loosen the packing nut assembly clamp lever and begin advancing the valve cartridge insertion assembly. Continue advancing the feed screw until the valve cartridge assembly is completely seated. The valve cartridge assembly is completely seated when the bottom of the stop collar makes contact with the top of the packing nut assembly. Lock the valve cartridge assembly in place by cross-tightening the 4 Allen head completion pins. Tighten each pin until the head is snugly against the flange. Tighten the packing nut assembly clamp lever. Attach a hose to the 3/4 inch ball valve on the insertion housing. Slowly open the insertion housing ball valve. A light stream of water will flow from the hose. Slowly loosen the packing nut clamp lever. Raise the feed screw no more than 1 inch to expose the insertion tool lock nut. Use a 3/4 inch open-ended wrench to loosen the lock nut until the insertion tool rises to allow the auto-equalizing check valve to close. The light stream of water from the hose will decrease and stop as the insertion tool is disengaged from the valve cartridge. Continue to turn the insertion tool lock nut, raising the feed screw 1 inch at a time as needed to fully disengage the insertion tool from the valve cartridge. Once the insertion tool is fully retracted, retighten the packing nut assembly clamp lever. Begin removing the Insta-Valve 250 insertion equipment. Back out the feed screw and remove the feed screw guide plate. Complete the removal of the feed screw. Loosen the packing nut clamp lever. Retract the insertion tool completely into the Hydra-Tapper. Tighten the packing nut clamp lever to secure the insertion tool. Loosen and remove the nuts and bolts securing the installation housing and Hydra-Tapper assembly. Remove the installation assembly. Remove the temporary gate valve. When removing a temporary gate valve, we recommend leaving one of the bolts opposite of the wheel side installed until a lifting strap is installed and secured to keep the temporary gate valve from falling. Place a white Teflon washer onto the valve stem. Replace the NPT plug into the stainless steel check valve. Lubricate the O-ring in the bore of the Insta-Valve 250 bonnet and install over the valve stem. Align the bolt holes and install the bolts, nuts, and washers. Finger tighten the nuts and then completely tighten with a 15/16 and 1 1/16 open-ended wrench. Set the 2-inch operating nut onto the valve stem. Thread the operating locking nut onto the valve stem. Installation of the Insta-Valve is now complete. Fully open and close the Insta-Valve 250 to confirm successful installation. Thank you for watching the 4 through 8 inch Insta-Valve 250 installation procedure video.